Hello, it's Scott Manley here. It's April 4th. Tomorrow I have to fly to LA to DJ at Yuri's night, but right now I have to record another batch of deep space updates. And so we rewind the clock to March 21st. We're over in China at Jichuan. The Series 1 rocket launched by Galactic Energy was named Vernal Ascent, and it carried satellites Yunyao 43 through 48, another section of meteorology constellation which goes into sun-synchronous orbit. The 24th of March, we saw Falcon 9 launching NROL 69, which was USA 498 and 499, a pair of satellites out of Slick 40 on the East Coast. Now, this is believed to be low Earth orbit electronics intelligence satellite, of course, for the National Reconnaissance Office. 26th of March, over in Mahia, down in New Zealand, the Electron launched for Rocket Lab. This mission was called Finding Hot Wildfires Near You. And this is the beginning of a new constellation for a company called Aurora Tech. They're supposed to carry 8 wildfire observation detection satellites into 550-kilometer orbits. These satellites are built by Spire Global. And apparently this is supposed to be the first constellation designed for wildfire detection and data accumulation, which is obviously something that I'm kind of interested in, given that California has a few of those wildfires. 26th of March, we had the Long March 3B/E carrying Tianlin 204 out of Xichang. And this launched into geostationary transfer orbit. Obviously, it's going to GEO, and that means it's a communication satellite. And this is actually like the Chinese equivalent of TDRS, right? It's a data tracking relay-based communication satellite that's designed to talk to Chinese spacecraft in lower orbits. This is like second, third generation of these satellites, I believe, but it's obviously very important to Tiangong Space Station. 26th of March, we had another Falcon 9 carrying 27 Starlink. They've obviously managed to shrink the mass of these satellites down a little. Group 11-7 out of Vandenberg. At 29th, we had Long March 7A carrying a satellite called TJS-16. That's a Tongsin Jishuxian. And again, this is a geostationary satellite, which I believe it's a military early warning satellite designed to catch rocket launches and stuff early on. And obviously, geostationary orbit's a good position for this. And then, yes, looking for launches from the Earth. Well, we were all watching in Europe on the 30th of March when Isar Aerospace launched their Spectrum rocket for the first time on a mission called Going Full Spectrum. Well, I'm not sure they went full anything. They got to less than 500 meters high, but it was technically the first orbital rocket launch attempt from European soil from the Andøya spaceport in Norway. I have a whole video about that. I haven't really heard any further information beyond the CEO and various employees saying that they got all sorts of really useful data and science and engineering, and now they understand things better. They're going to do better next time, and I hope there is a next time. Anyway, on the 31st of March, there was a Falcon 9 carrying 28 Starlink satellites, a Group 6-80 out of Slick 40 on the East Coast. 1st of April, not a fool, Fram 2 carrying Cheng Wang, Yannick Mikkelsen, Rabia Roga, and Eric Phillips. This is a Dragon spacecraft launched on a Falcon 9, the very first human crew to go into a polar orbit. 90.01 degrees, so slightly retrograde even. Apparently it's like a 413-kilometer orbit. We've had a few videos from this since then, just video stuff from orbit. Also on the 1st of April, there was Long March 2D. This was, it's called Hulian Jishuxian, and it's satellite number 6A, B, C, D, and E out of it's part of the Jingwang constellation, I believe. I think it's another one of these communications, low Earth orbit. 3rd of April, we also had a Long March 6 carrying Tianping 3 radar calibration satellite, possibly, maybe. It's always very hard to tell. And then just a few hours ago, we had a Falcon 9 launching out of Vandenberg, carrying 27 more Starlink satellites into Group 11-13. And I would have seen it, except that I forgot it happened. And so yeah, let's come back to Fram 2. It spent the week in space. We've had a lot of videos and images from the crew. We've seen what the poles look like from space, and apparently they're just very, very white. And even although they have seasoned polar explorers on the crew, they actually had a hard time getting their orientation from several hundred kilometers up. We also got to see things like medical x-rays being taken in space, which is kind of neat. First x-ray taken in space. Actually, that might not be the first one, but it is a nice thing to have this compact system. I noticed, by the way, that some of the onboard stuff that they were shooting, they're using iPhone 16 Pros by the looks of things, because you can tell by the reflection of the lenses. And yeah, so they spent a few days in space, and they just landed this morning, and they became the first Crew Dragon to land in the Pacific Ocean. Now, in the early days of the Cargo Dragon, some of them landed in the Pacific, but the crew stuff was all happening over in the Atlantic or in the Gulf, Florida side. But then they would have to ship the Dragon spacecraft, the capsules, all the way back to the West Coast so they could be refurbished in the Hawthorne factory. It makes more sense for them to recover on the West Coast, then they don't have so far to go. Also, the way that they are approaching this means that they'll be approaching from the Pacific. There's no land that they will have to cross over. So this now allows them to ditch the Dragon after they've ditch the trunk after they've performed the deorbit burn. And that means the trunk is going to end up in the ocean rather than burning up and breaking into pieces and dropping debris somewhere. Also, the crew posted a short snippet of what the Draco thrusters sound like from inside the spacecraft, and they're dancing around like it's music. It's like rhythmic music at about 120 beats per minute. This is literally, as Xena Carbon's coined, Draco techno, and I'm totally going to steal that line steal that idea for my DJ set if I can get away with it. But yeah, it was a successful deorbit and landing, and after landing, we got to see the crew essentially try to leave the spacecraft under their own power. Now, they had people on hand to make sure that they didn't fall over, but they weren't needed. The crew got up, they removed their footrests, they crawled out, and slowly but carefully walked away. So that is the end of the mission. We'll hopefully see some better quality footage now that they're Earthside, because we saw some very big, high quality, like movie cameras taken with some big glass on them. And I expect that that's recording uncompressed, raw footage, which, we'll see if we're able to make some magic out of that. The other crew spaceflight story was, Butch and Sunny from Starliner flight test, Crew 9. They have been doing post-flight interviews, and, they've been very diplomatic about this. I think Butch in particular made it very clear that, he feels that he's slightly responsible for not actually checking everything and going with, this is the thing. It's like, I think that real astronauts, real leaders know how to accept blame when you say, maybe I did something wrong there. Anyway, the most interesting article came from Eric Berger, and he apparently managed to sit down with them. I think he was the last person of the day and the one that was perhaps most fluent in space technology, space terminology. And he got an extra long discussion about the exact nature or the exact set of problems that happened as they were trying to dock with the International Space Station. And Butch is describing basically a situation where at one point they had not enough thrusters to actually go forwards. They had lost one of their 6 degrees of freedom. And they were basically rebooting the system and bringing it back up and hoping that systems came back up in long enough for them to complete the docking. This felt a bit like the video game Elite Dangerous, right? Where if your thrusters are down to 0% operation, you could reboot your system. And I've done this while being chased. It's a very stressful situation to realize that you have no control and you're literally turning off and on again, hoping that it will work again. I did actually look at the sort of post, like the NASA discussion after the docking, and they did actually describe pretty much the same sequence of events, but it sounds a whole lot more dramatic when they're being told firsthand by the person that was sitting at the controls and wasn't sure whether they were going to be able to complete the docking or possibly how well they'd be able to get home. Anyway, yeah, moving onwards, we had a bunch of news stories. So Gravitics, you might remember they started out talking about doing space station modules, which would fit in Starship. Well, right now, Starship is still not in a position to be launching space station modules, but they have got a Space Force contract to build an orbital carrier spacecraft, which can carry a number of smaller satellites that can be deployed. So they can basically have this thing sit in space and then deploy the satellites and turn them on as and when they're needed to replace other ones. Vulcan, they are now certified for National Security Launch Program. They actually released a really good video going over how they analyzed the problem with the Northrop Grumman booster, the GEM, strap-on engines. And they actually showed some footage of the submarine going down and recovering these boosters from the bottom of the sea so they can actually verify that they worked. Or verify the problems with it. They recovered like the nozzle out in the swamp. And yeah, it's a pretty good video. I would suggest watching it. So the next Cygnus mission to the International Space Station is officially scrapped. The pressure vessel for NG-22, the Northrop Grumman 22, was sufficiently damaged that they will not be using it on that mission. And so they'll probably take the pieces back and figure out what they can salvage. But the next flight, so this flight was going to be in June. That means Northrop Grumman 23 may happen in the autumn of this year, but this means, of course, the space station is operating in constrained supply scenario right now. And yes, there was some casual reference that maybe they could use a Starliner test, but that would be a very inefficient way to transport supplies to the International Space Station. But they're still speaking, by the way, as if Starliner is going to fly another mission, and I believe that they should actually continue to develop it unless there's a viable replacement, right? And I mean an alternative that isn't, we want to have two different ways to go to space because that's cool. Yeah, okay. China, they, I'm not sure how this happened, but there was something that published which basically details China's roadmap for planetary exploration, and they are very ambitious. So later this year, we're going to have Tianwen 2. Tianwen 1 went to Mars. Tianwen 2, I believe, is going to go and get a sample from an asteroid, and it's launching in the next few months. Tianwen 3 is the one that's going to go and return a sample from Mars, and they're launching that in 2028. It's very likely going to beat NASA at this rate. But then we started to hear about their future plans beyond that. So Tianwen 4, and believe that they are going to have that fly out to Jupiter. This will be launching in like 2029 and eventually enter orbit around the moon Callisto. Now, this is going to be in comparison or in contrast to Europe's Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer and the US's Europa Clipper. They're all going to be exploring these icy moons of Jupiter. In 2033, they're aiming to have a mission which will do a sample return from the upper atmosphere of Venus, potentially hoping that there might be some evidence of particles or stuff that perhaps give clues as to life or something else. Who knows? But this is something that they are looking at. So, and then the long term is they want to have a Mars research station. It sounds like this isn't a research station with people on it. It's just like they're going to put a fairly large rover out there and have it operate for an extended period of time. Finally, the next mission that came up on their list was in 2039, a planned nuclear-powered mission to Neptune, which is an interesting choice, skipping over Uranus or Uranus. Yeah, they would want to orbit the moon, or orbit the planet and investigate the moon of Triton, which of course is one of the first places where we discovered cryovolcanism. Anyway, that whole thing is fascinating, and it just sort of reinforces the fact that China are very much playing for prestige in this world. And, you know, they're potentially going to beat NASA on a bunch of things if NASA doesn't get the resources that it needs to compete. Uh, so yeah, I talked about how Vulcan is now certified for the National Security Space Launch Program. Well, a few weeks ago, or a couple of weeks ago, they just added another pair of providers to that program. So now Rocket Lab and Stoke Space are both added to Phase 3 Lane 1. And so they've reorganized this program in such a way that they can onboard new launch vehicles. And the idea is Lane 1 is for the sort of more experimental launchers, and that's where you're going to have Blue Origin and Rocket Lab and Stoke Space. And Lane 2 is for the demonstrated providers, that's ULA and, of course, SpaceX. And so these launch providers, they're currently competing for launches out to like 2029. And hot off the press, literally minutes after I posted this video to YouTube, the Department of Defense actually announced the winners of the National Security Space Launch Phase 3, $13.7 billion split between SpaceX, ULA, and Blue Origin. $5.9 billion going to SpaceX, $5.4 to ULA, and $2.4 going to Blue Origin. Combined between them, there'll be like 54 launches between 2025 and 2029. Airbus are going to be building the lander stage for the ExoMars rover, which is carrying Rosalind Franklin rover. That's what it's called. So this is the actual stage that performs the final rocket-powered landing on the surface. I think the cruise stage with the heat shield and stuff, that is separate. This is apparently a $150 million contract. Now, originally the lander was supposed to be built by Russia, but of course, Russia were the program had to separate itself from Russia in 2022. And since then, the rover has more or less been sitting in storage waiting for the organization to decide who would build the lander for it. Expected that this thing will reach the Martian surface possibly in 2030. The FAA has closed 2 high-profile rocket launch mishap investigations on the same day. So IFT-7, right, the Starship flight, that investigation is now closed. They've accepted SpaceX's explanation that the failure was due to extra vibration, etc., etc., etc. They haven't closed IFT-8, which we're pretty sure is due to the same thing, but it notes in the IFT-7 closure that SpaceX are not supposed to fly Starship right now until IFT-8 investigation is closed, but I don't know if we'll find anything different. But while we're on the subject of IFT-7, we have just found out that the booster from that flight, booster number 14, is going to be reused as the booster for flight number 9. They've been able to reuse 29 of the 33 engines, and it is currently on the tests and performing tests to verify that it works. So that'll be the first Starship booster being reused. More interestingly, I guess, is the fact that Blue Origin's New Glenn launch, the investigation into why the re-entry and landing never worked, that has been closed as well. And they've identified a number of corrective actions related to like engine control and bleed, cool down, that kind of stuff, which it sounds like Blue Origin may be able to get another launch in before the spring ends. So we've got a couple of months and maybe we'll see a Blue Origin second attempt to launch. We also, of course, understand that there were potentially problems with Blue Ring or the second stage, and Blue Origin will be no doubt eager to show that those problems are addressed as well. Now, the other big thing that Blue Origin will be carrying on New Glenn is Kuiper, but since it's not ready, well, we all know that Amazon bought a whole bunch of Atlas Vs to fly satellites for the Kuiper network, and we've got to the point where we're going to launch the first batch of 27 Kuiper satellites out of 3,200 satellites. So it's expected that these will fly on an Atlas V. The mission will be called KA-1, and I believe the launch date is supposed to be April 9th, so pay attention to that. It'll be Well, it's interesting actually that we were expecting another Vulcan launch, but instead we're rolling out an Atlas. Spin Launch, you might remember them as the company that wants to throw satellites into space. Yes, the biggest yeet ever. As of right now, they are still working on that, but they've also decided in parallel to work on a more conventional business model. They're building out a satellite constellation, 200 satellites for a constellation called Meridian, not Iridium. And this includes like an investment by the company that wants to like operate the constellation by the sound of things. So we're talking about like small satellites, 70-kilogram satellites, very flat. Um, and it sounds like they may be able to get authorization, or they're trying to get authorization to deploy up to 1,200 of these satellites. It's not clear what the market is, but they do talk about 5G like protocols. So maybe they're looking at direct to sell. Uh, yeah, spin launch. I'm still hoping that they actually get somewhere with their giant spinny thing, even if it doesn't work on Earth because it's too fast. It would make a lot of sense to fly that kind of thing from the moon where there's no atmosphere or anything to get in the way. And now for something which is literally awesome, because that's the name of the program. So I saw this video posted like on one of my chats. It's somebody took a time lapse of the aurora up in Alaska, and they happened to see a sounding rocket launch, and they figured out that this sounding rocket was part of a program called AWESOME, right? Auroral waves excited by substorm onset magnetic events, right? And this is looking at the behavior of the aurora like in the thermosphere. So they've launched a bunch of different these like Black Brant and Terrier improved Malamutes, multi-stage sounding rockets. And as they go up and as they come down, they were like emitting gases which would illuminate and interact with the gases in the atmosphere. What they're looking at is how solar, like auroral events, heat the upper atmosphere, and they want to figure out how the heat is being transferred and dissipated. And so by putting these tracers into the atmosphere just before dawn, by the way, so that they get illuminated, they're able to actually visualize the motion. But anyway, whole thing is like I saw this video and I thought that's a cool thing, because usually when I talk about suborbital launches, it's either things crashing or people flying to space on New Shepard. And there is actually science that is done with suborbital spaceflight that's worth talking about. On the moon, by the way, Blue Ghost, it shut down, and we waited until sun rose, and we haven't heard anything from it, so it is probably dead. We had hoped that maybe there was a chance it might wake up, but yeah, unfortunately, no. It living on the surface of the moon, or sorry, surviving lunar night is very, very hard. It seems that it's very rare for a spacecraft to do this. Anyway, coming back to Earth, Jared Isaacman is finally getting his day in the limelight to sit before Congress and make his case for why he should be the director, the head of NASA. So this is something that was like announced even before Trump officially became president, which meant that, by the way, that Trump holds the record for the longest time between becoming president and naming an administrator from NASA. He also has the shortest time between becoming president and naming an administrator of NASA. But for the last few weeks, the last few months, we've been wondering, why has Jared been like not nominated? Why hasn't he had his chance? Well, April 9th, he's going to have his chance. And I heard some sources saying that Ted Cruz wasn't a big fan, and that might have been something of an obstacle, but it looks like he's mostly just not really been promoting it. We got pictures of Jared with all sorts of senators. He's having like one-on-one meetings and saying, "How can I help you?" and et cetera, et cetera. Also, Greg Autry has officially been nominated again as NASA's CFO. He was nominated towards the end of the first Trump presidency, but before he could actually go through the nominations or whatever procedure, presidency changed, and so he never got that. Interesting, by the way, in these changes at NASA, you understand there's a lot of pressure to make big changes to programs and save money. I noticed that Artemis have published a patch for Artemis 2. And now that it's got a patch, you can't cancel it, right? I mean, it is pretty much a banger of a patch, but I'm not sure that will be enough to keep the program around. Nevertheless, I do hope that this flies, and I do hope that we're not beaten to the moon by China, but yeah, don't really know. So anyway, now that Fram 2 is back safely, I guess the big thing to look forward to, or at least the thing that most people in the world might know about, will be Katy Perry going to space on New Shepard. And that neatly ties into the fact that on Saturday night, I'm going to be playing records at Yuri's Night. And if you are in LA and you're doing the Yuri's Night thing, say hi. I'll have all sorts of cool videos and music, and I'll be talking and doing whatever, right? Don't be afraid to say hi if you're down there. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.